The OnePlus 8T is finally here, and it packs a punch with some slight improvements over its predecessors, the OnePlus 8 and OnePlus 7T. But is it worth upgrading to if you already own one of those devices? Well, let's find out in my unboxing and extremely detailed review of the OnePlus 8T, in which I will be covering the design and build, comparing it to other devices, testing out its display, a 65-watt charging speed test, software, speakers, 120 frames per second gaming, benchmarks, and finally cameras. But first, let's find out what's inside the box. No surprise here that OnePlus have once again boxed up the 8T in a long, lanky red box. Cheapest price we can find is indeed the 8GB of RAM, 128 gigs of storage variant. Cheapest here in China, of course, second cheapest in India, then the UK, and the most expensive in the USA. But unfortunately in the States you can only get it in a 12GB of RAM variant, bringing it all the way up to $750 USD. We get not one sticker like you see in Apple's iPhone, but plenty OnePlus stickers over here. We also get included a nice TPU case with the Never Settle slogan at the back there, and for the first time we get a USB Type-C to Type-C instead of Type-A to Type-C because of that wonderful Warp Charge 65. There is the block, indeed not quite as big as I was expecting, pretty much the same size as the Warp 30T block, though it's really nice to see that it says 65-watt max at the back. The phone looks absolutely stunning in this lunar silver color. I was expecting it to be more of like a grayish tint than a baby bluish to a silver tint. Nevertheless, it still looks spectacular, much like you would expect from a frosted glass back matte finish OnePlus device. Though not really a fingerprint magnet, you can definitely see your fingers in certain lighting conditions, though thankfully we have that wonderful cover, so slap it on and you should be good to go on the fingerprint front. We have a nice spacey power button over there, as well as a mute switch, which we've seen for the past couple years on OnePlus devices, and a non-split volume rocker. I'm still disappointed that that is not split. We do fortunately have a dual SIM tray here. Unfortunately 5G only works with one of them, and there is no space for an SD card slot. We do have USB 3.1 speeds and a 4500 mAh battery, and dual stereo speakers with Dolby Atmos support, which is great. We have an aluminum frame and Gorilla Glass 5 at the front and back of the device, and we do have a bit of a camera bump over here, though not quite as big as its bigger brother, the OnePlus 8 Pro, and it is slightly bigger than the Xiaomi Mi 10 Ultra, both of which cost a bit more than the OnePlus 8T, but the OnePlus 8T has less of a camera wobble. The design looks pretty similar to the OnePlus 8 Pro over here, though it is slightly thinner and lighter. It is much lighter and much thinner than the Xiaomi Mi 10 Ultra with a similar form factor. That back looks absolutely stunning, but what about the front of the device? Well, we are welcomed to a 20:9 aspect ratio, 6.55-inch fluid AMOLED display with 16 million colors. It is indeed Full HD Plus with HDR10 Plus support. It comes with over 1,000 nits of peak brightness and a wonderful 120 Hz refresh rate panel, up from the 90 on the OnePlus 8, matching the OnePlus 8 Pro's 120, but lacking the QHD Plus panel that the OnePlus 8 Pro does indeed have. But it is cheaper, so you kind of understand it. Up close and personal, it still looks perfectly clear in vivid mode using the display option within the phone. It is not quite as bright as the 8 Pro. It's pretty much on par with the Mi 10 Ultra, and it only has two options for variable refresh rates, only between 60 and 120. And you can notice the difference. It just would have been nice for them to have included 90 here as well, if you want to preserve a little bit more battery life, but you don't want to use that dog slow 60 Hz like we've seen on the latest iPhones. Leave that for another video. We're going to be comparing the 120 Hz to the other two devices here, the OnePlus 8 Pro and the Mi 10 Ultra, which I have in my studio with me. It looks pretty much as fluid. You can see just as much ghosting. The ghosting gives you an indication of how smooth it is. You would actually have to go in store and feel it for yourself. It is absolutely incredible using a high refresh panel. It's really hard to go back to 60. It's going to be tough for me to go for the iPhone 12, but anyway, I'll give it a go. We do have a couple other display options for the OnePlus 8T over here. Unfortunately, not all apps can go into full screen mode, which sucks. We do have dark mode, but we can't choose between different levels of dark mode like we saw with Oppo's latest Color OS, though we can use certain third-party apps. Can't use Facebook, but we can use apps like Twitter, and it darkens pretty much everything as you would expect. You can also change the accent color over here to make it look nicer with that dark background. And of course, we have an ambient display this time around. You can keep it always on, day or night, and you can schedule it as well, which is great. We also have something called Insight, which pretty much takes a chunk out of this colorful bar every time you use your phone screen on time, that is, and also indicates your unlocks. But it is a bit dim, which kind of sucks, and there's no way of changing this. But in order to use all these wonderful features, you're going to want to charge up your phone. Thankfully, OnePlus have finally moved on from 30 watts, which has been going on for 2 years, to 65 watts. So let's give it a go. I've drained my phone over here, and 0% in 0 minutes. Battery optimization is indeed off, and just an interesting thing about battery optimization, if you turn it on, it learns your charging patterns and makes sure it just trickles charging through while you sleep, which is absolutely awesome. But that's not why we're here. 26% in 10 minutes is pretty darn great, I would say. Not the fastest I have seen. Remember, the OnePlus 8 Pro has a very similar sized battery, but 30 watts of charging. It did a full charge in 69 minutes, an hour and 9 minutes. The Realme X7 Pro is the same size, charging block and battery, and it did it in 36 minutes. Let's see what happens with the OnePlus 8T here, if it can match that. The OnePlus 8T is advertised to finish in 39 minutes at 100% juice, but we just have 62%, 63% after 30 minutes over here. Moving on up to that 39-minute mark, let's see if it can reach the advertised time. No, it can't. OnePlus advertised 100% in 39 minutes. I got 81% in 39 minutes, which kind of sucks considering the X7 Pro with the same block and battery size did it in 36 minutes. This only got 100% in 50 minutes. So definitely quicker than the OnePlus 8 Pro's 30 watt charging of over an hour, pretty much an hour and 10 minutes, about 20 minutes quicker than that. And we sat at about 40 degrees Celsius the entire time, which is not too hard considering we're using 65 watt charging and two split 2250 milliamp hour battery cells. Once your phone's fully charged up, you can go ahead and use that wonderful optical fingerprint sensor underneath the display. It's pretty much exactly the same as the one you see underneath the display of the OnePlus 8 Pro, pretty much the same speed as well. Definitely a tad quicker than the one that you see under the Xiaomi Mi 10 Ultra over here due to Xiaomi's crazy animations. And we also have 2D facial recognition, not very secure, but it is nice and snappy. Not quite as quick as the OnePlus 8 Pro, I must add. Very strange in that department, but it is definitely slightly quicker, once again, to the more expensive Xiaomi Mi 10 Ultra, though still a wonderful device. Before we get diving deep into software, I want to show you guys a couple awesome customization options. Of course, you can set the fingerprint to no animation at all, which is awesome. And we have this new thing called Canvas, which can pretty much get set as your always on display and your wallpaper. So it's my face, jump into the phone, and it's a regular wallpaper. It says it works better with faces, so if you don't want it to be your face and you want it to be a regular wallpaper, it doesn't look that great on your always on display. If you want to use your favorite fictional characters such as Rick and Morty, for me, doesn't really do a good job, even though they are faces. And with this amazing Spider-Man picture over here, it would have been really cool for this to be outlined and then go into it on my always on display. Fortunately, it doesn't work so well, though we do have some nice new live wallpapers which do a superb job on the OnePlus 8T, and we get Android 11 out the box. Diving deeper into the software front over here, we do have Hydrogen OS here in China. It is known as Oxygen OS around the world. They're pretty much identical. It is nice, fluid, and fresh. If anything, it feels and looks a lot more like Samsung One UI than Oxygen OS. Oxygen OS has always been about stock Android, giving you the stock Android experience, and they're kind of adding on top of that what Samsung have been doing for years, and I'm not quite sure how I feel about it. Nevertheless, it still looks nice, clean, and neat, and they have changed some of their system applications. Finally, it's been a while, such as the Photos app as well as the Weather app, and their icons actually change as you progress through the day. We also have a new Notes app, which is great, and you can also use voice speaking to text over here, which is once again another great plus. And the haptics feel just as great as the more expensive OnePlus 8 Pro. The power button has changed a bit. You can take a screenshot from there, and they want you to use things more one-handed, but these options go right to the top. And if you have a Google Home device, it can also pop up there, which is great. And of course, we have the wonderful mute switch on the side, which is amazing. And talking about sound, we also have Dolby Atmos, which we're going to be testing out with the wonderful Game Space, and enabling Game Fanatic mode over here to boost our performance. Once we are in a game, you can actually pull down from either corner of the device to check the temperature and the time, as well as notification settings. And we of course have that wonderful Snapdragon 865 processing chip, which we're going to put to the test right now in Call of Duty Mobile, maxing out graphics as well as FPS and getting a solid 60 since the game is capped at that. PUBG Mobile is the next game that we have here, and usually when you hit on smooth you get a 90 frames per second option. Unfortunately, that is not yet available for Android 11 and the newly released OnePlus 8T. Hopefully that gets improved with a future software update, but so far we're getting a solid 60. Bullet Force has no frames per second cap, so it can and should go all the way up to 120, but we're getting capped at 60. A 120 Hz refresh rate phone, capping at 60. Dead Trigger 2 also has no FPS cap, and it actually says it's running at 120, but once again capping at 60 on the OnePlus 8T. Real Racing 3, once again, no frames per second cap, but the 8T is capping it at 60 once more. I really hope this gets fixed with a future software update, but performance can be tested through benchmarks as well. So let's go ahead and give AnTuTu version 8 a run for its money on the new OnePlus 8T. Unfortunately, we don't have the newly improved Snapdragon 865 Plus processing chip, but we are using Fanatic mode with the Snapdragon 865. The battery drained by 4% instead of the average 5%, and we jumped up 10.8 degrees in Celsius in the battery department instead of the regular 2.7. And when it comes to the CPU, it got 2 degrees hotter than it should, and it added 10 degrees in Celsius, where on most Snapdragon 865 powered phones it only usually adds 3.5. It got an overall score of 573,255 points on AnTuTu version 8.4.7, which is a slight improvement over the OnePlus 8, but it is not quite hitting heights of the OnePlus 8 Pro. Though the 8 Pro cost more money, they are using the same chipset inside of them. The next benchmark we'll be testing out here using Fanatic mode once more is indeed Geekbench 5.2. We're doing a CPU run, OpenCL and Vulkan GPU test. We got a single core score of 895 and a multi-core score of 3183, which is lower than the average Snapdragon 865 powered smartphone score. OpenCL GPU API, we got a score of 3211, which is indeed slightly higher than the average Snapdragon 865 score. When it comes to Vulkan GPU API, we got a score of 3117, which is lower than the 865. We get the same 16 megapixel selfie snapper that we had in the OnePlus 8 Pro, and it takes some pretty decent pictures. The main selfie looks great and the bokeh looks great, but as I say with all OnePlus devices, the edge detection is not perfect.
What's up guys, this is Technic recording a 1080p 30fps video on the OnePlus 8T. It is completely capped at 1080p and 30 frames per second. Let me know what you guys think of the video and audio quality when recording using the selfie cam on the OnePlus 8T.
We have the same 48 megapixel Sony IMX586 sensor that we saw on the OnePlus 8, OnePlus Nord, OnePlus 7T, and yes, even the OnePlus 7. The ultra-wide camera is exactly the same as the OnePlus 8, though we do have a slightly higher field of view of 123. The ultra-wide snapper looks absolutely great. I have nothing to complain about with this picture, as well as the 48 megapixel main, 12 megapixel binned 4:1 binning over here. Looks picture perfect. 2 times digital zoom doesn't look terrible. 5 times is really crushing the barrier over here. 10 times is the max zoom and it looks unusable, guys. Don't even try this at home. 12 megapixel main close-up doesn't look the best. The 5 megapixel macro, I guess, gets some extra detail if you're into that. We have the regular natural bokeh effect here, and then using the actual depth sensor does a great job too. Here is me with the regular sensor, and then with the depth sensor, perfect edge detection, though I look a bit strange. And we do have 1080p 30 frames per second video portrait mode now, and I must say it doesn't look terrible. Hopefully this gets a quality boost in the coming years. We have 1080p 60 frames per second, nice and smooth with that wonderful optical image stabilization lens that we have coming from the main sensor over here. 4K 60, same thing can be said with that. Even clearer, even more detail. We always get crispy, clean video from OnePlus devices, especially their T-series devices, if my opinion is anything to go by. Unfortunately, when it comes to ultra wide, we are capped at 30 frames per second with 1080p. There is no 60 FPS option over here, as well as 4K 30 FPS, no 60. FPS option here. When it comes to ultra wide, it still looks great. The color accuracy is on par and it picks up light pretty well. We have super stable on the right hand side and off on the left. The dropping quality is just not worth it for stability. The OnePlus 8T has a lot going for it if you look at it on its own. It has a stunning design with a beautiful frosted glass matte back finish, a physical mute switch, dual stereo speakers with Dolby Atmos, 65 watt ultra sharp fast warp charging, paired with a large 4500 mAh battery, improved software with Android 11 out the box, as well as an increased 120 Hz refresh rate fluid AMOLED display. However, it's not alone. The competition in this price bracket is steep. We're talking Google Pixel 5, Samsung Galaxy S20 Fan Edition, and even the newly released iPhone 12. All of which feature an IP certified water and dust resistance rating, as well as wireless charging support. Two features which prevent the OnePlus 8T from taking the top spot. The S20 Fan Edition even supports storage expansion with the support for a micro SD card slot. It is, however, worth mentioning that the OnePlus 8T is indeed cheaper than all of these smartphones outside of the United States. Its charging may not be miles faster than its predecessors. It might have adopted a Samsung One UI software approach. It uses the same primary Sony IMX586 sensor that we've seen on the OnePlus Nord, OnePlus 8, OnePlus 7T, and even the OnePlus 7, and it still lacks a telephoto camera and replaces that with a macro and depth sensor. And to top it all off, that wonderful 120 Hz refresh rate panel is pretty much only useful for ultra smooth scrolling, as OnePlus has said recently, but it seems to cap all high refresh rate supported games at 60. But if you can look past these lack of features and find one at a decent price point, it might just very well be worth getting the OnePlus 8T in your pocket. After all, it is a OnePlus, and OnePlus devices are fast. However, if you currently own a OnePlus device later than the OnePlus 7, I recommend you skip this one.